So it's a pleasure and honour to have a chance to talk to Horace Barlow. Horace, when and where were you born?
I was born in a village in Buckinghamshire called Chesham Boyce in 1921.
December. Tell me something about your ancestors as far back as you like to go. Preferably not the Norman Conquest, but more...
No, I don't go back to Norman Conquest. I don't know what I was before then. But of course I've known about my connection with Charles Darwin, who was my great-great-grandfather. I think I've got that right now, what greats in now. Since I was very small, because the whole Darwin family is very family conscious, you know.
Yes.
Not perhaps as family conscious as many families who do get back to Norman Conquest, but equally proud, I think.
Your wife was a Darwin, is that right?
No, my mother was a Darwin.
Your mother was a Darwin.
Yes.
Yeah.
She was Horace Darwin's eldest child, actually.
So she was Darwin's granddaughter?
Yes, yes. And my father was the oldest son of Thomas Barlow, who has the distinction of being somebody who had a disease named after him, and he was physician to Queen Victoria's household. So he was a big doctor at the time.
What disease was it that he was?
What he did was to distinguish between two forms of scurvy. Scurvy rickets, as it's sometimes called, which is rickets due to shortage of vitamin C, and what's customarily in England called the only one referred to as rickets is the one due to lack of vitamin D. And I saw a lot of him because he used to come around a lot and view his grandchildren. He had an enormous number of them, he was a wonderful old man, actually. When in 1929, I think it was, my parents and family moved from Chesham Boyce, where I was born, to the house that he built in 1901. As the rewards of being a famous physician then were very, very large, but he came from a cotton family in Lancashire. So I don't know that I want to go back any further than grandparents, really. I mean, it's not.
Did your mother talk about her grandfather? Did she know him?
Oh yes, and I was very enthusiastic about him. I mean,
was she?
And in those days, thought that he was rather underrated, you know. Whereas I think when she died, she realised that perhaps he might even be overrated. So much that his reputation, so to speak, increased during that time.
Did you or she know Gwen Raverett?
Oh yes, very closely, you know.
You knew her, did you?
Yeah, yes.
What was she like? She wrote period pieces.
Well, she was quite a formidable character.
She American? Or?
No, her mother was American.
That's right.
She wasn't. She was married to Jacques Raverett, who's French. But
formidable, was she?
Yes. But well, every time I see a period piece, you know, I'd pick it up and read a paragraph or two. That's so wonderful.
Well, let's move on then to your parents. Describe them.
Yes. Well, I suppose we were, so to speak, members of the intelligentsia and the middle classes, upper middle classes. not very anxious not to be regarded as aristocratic or too posh, so to speak. But with an enormous number of our friends and relatives, well, our friends were relatives, in fact.
Mm.
So the house was always full of other Darwins, and we saw a lot of them.
And Wedgwoods. Yeah.
And Wedgwoods, yes.
Yes. Where was this? You were living in this?
Well, my parents' first house was in Chesham Bois, which is near Amersham.
How do you spell that? Chesham?
Chesham.
And the second?
Bois is Bois. Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It was a Huguenot settlement there, or something, I think.
And what did your father do?
Well, he rose to be a senior position, and not the head of the civil service, but quite high. He was quite a successful civil servant, and he was Oxford, read classics, and then went into the civil service and rose within it, so to speak. He was busy. He went up London every day until long after normal retirement. He had many other occupations in London.
And how did he influence you? I mean, what was his?
Well, he had much less influence on me than my mother. I think my mother took the attitude that bringing up children wasn't his job. But he was, and I very quickly recognised that my mental attitudes were not those of a classical scholar at Oxford, but much closer to my mother's. She was one of William Bateson's students, except she wasn't a student because she never came to the university. Her sister did, but she worked in Bateson's group, counting seeds and offspring and so on. And I think I had an undergraduate friend who was reading genetics and said, immediately quoted one of her papers. I think it's probably the only one she wrote that is ever quoted now, which has something to do with the trisomy and plants. She tried to make me a botanist, but I rebelled against that side, the botanist side, but not against the scientific side, because she was very observant herself and would always be pointing out little Darwinian details,
Did you used to go for walks with her?
Yes, and she was a very keen gardener.
Look at a frog or whatever.
Yes.
Did you spend time in Grantchester? Because Bateson was out in Grantchester.
Sorry?
Did you spend time in Grantchester? Because Bateson was out in...
Yes, he was in Winchester. I didn't myself. I don't ever remember going to the house as a child, actually, but William Bateson's wife was a friend of my mother's too, and in fact I may have told you a story before. I don't know. When Gregory was out in Berkeley, he met Margaret Mead, and Beatrice Bateson, that's Gregory's mother, felt she was too old to go out there and inspect her, so to speak, any mother should. And so she sent my mother out there. She flew off in an Imperial Airlines airliner. We all went and saw her off from Hendon. That must have been 1937, 38, something like that. So that's how we got to know that's not how the Batesons were already in my family. That's why we met the other day.
What did she make of Margaret Mead? Because she was been... They
got on very well. I don't know if they got on well instantly, but I think she wasn't altogether convinced by Margaret Mead, if you see what I mean, but was very impressed by her breadth of knowledge and her energy, so to speak, and energetically expressed opinions too, and solutions to all sorts of problems.
Did you meet her?
Oh yes, she came and stayed with us many times.
What was your impression?
I think even more sceptical than my mother's. Though she was a very impressive person, and Gregory too. I mean, they were quite a formidable lot.
Tell me more about Gregory. You knew him from being a boy.
Yes. Well, I was just looking in connection with the film at the relative dates. He was born. Gregory, I think, was born in 1904, wasn't he?
Yes.
And my mother was born in, I think, 1886. So it was quite a big age difference between them. But I remember him. She used to come and visit my mother and stay occasionally. But I never got on close intellectual terms with Gregory, even though we were to some extent interested in the same sort of thing. I mean, both in the interest of cybernetics for psychology and so on, and his ideas were always interesting, you know. But I don't know, he wasn't, he didn't take the same, my model of a scientist was taken from my mother, not from Richard, not from Gregory. You know.
So what is your model of a scientist?
No, she was interested in genetics. And I think the paper which is famous is the reproductive system in plants like cowslips and so on, where some of them have 3 stages of height of the reproductive apparatus, so that they can make 6 different types of cross, so to speak, between 2 individuals, which is, I think, of some interest even now.
But you're interested. What your model of a scientist is an experimental scientist, lab scientist.
Well, she reasoned like a scientist, yes.
Whereas Gregory didn't.
No, he was more like a bishop. You know.
Like a bishop?
No, not like a bishop, but like a guru. You know. Well, he was. I think he liked to think things out for himself, and then that was what he taught other people. And obviously had very big influence on a lot of people. I saw him once when I went to America, to Berkeley. He was in California. He was in California at that time. I saw him once or twice there too.
Let's come back to your early life. What is your first memory?
My very first
distinctive memory, not just sort of waving leaves in the wind kind of over your pram thing, but a particular event or something that...
Well, I was always interested in mechanical events, you know, and I didn't take to botany, you know, though the observations, which were, and I also didn't like the classical, you know, the natural history side of botany. Didn't seem to me all that real. You know, I was much more interested in steam engines. And
do you remember, as a sort of 3, 4, 5-year-old, any particular event or memory from that early childhood?
I remember our first car. I think probably the moment it was driven up the up the drive. That must have been before, must have been about 1925. And my father drove it home from having bought it somewhere in London, I don't know where. And he wasn't a very good driver. He always made terrible noises with the gears and so on. My mother was much better. So I was definitely on the mechanical side.
Well, when you were, a little older, that was when you were about 4 or 5, but sort of in the between 5 and 10, your mother was trying to get you interested in natural history, but what were your particular passions or hobbies or interests?
Well, I remember what I was good at school. I was good at mathematics and not good at languages. Which meant that they had serious worries whether they'd be able to get me to pass the common entrance to get into a public school. I did succeed eventually, but that was because I was. I think Winchester had a bigger weighting factor attached to mathematics than it did to most foreign languages or Greek or anything like that.
Where had you been at school before you went to Winchester?
It was a day school in Cheshire Boys, and then I went to a preparatory school which was run by relatives of the people who ran the day school I went to.
Was it a boarding school?
Boarding school, yes.
From what age did you go?
6, I should think it was.
Gosh, very young.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't not young for those days. I mean, that was, I think, about when boarding school.
Do you remember going away to a boarding school and what your feelings were?
I'm not liking it.
You? Were you very homesick? And
yes, I think I was rather a solitary boy. There was also my mother was left partly in charge, or not left, but of the Cornford children, of what the youngest two Cornford children.
Really?
That's Hugh. Did you know Hugh at all?
No.
Because the trio of Gwen Raverar and my mother and Francis Cornford, who was a poet.
Yes.
And they as children they grew up together and were very close to each other. And so and Hugh Cornford was at the same preparatory school as I was.
But you were rather lonely and kept yourself to yourself.
I think so.
Were you bullied? Do you remember?
Yes, I was bullied, and I think I sort of survived it, in a way that people do. Sort of.
You had to.
I didn't mind all that much about other people's opinion of me, so that, bullying didn't hurt as much.
Were you any good at games? That often is a salvation.
Yes, I was good at some games, some sport. I was good at archery, I remember. For some reason, the headmaster of the school was a very keen archery fan.
What was the school called?
Shortenhills.
Short?
Shortenhills. Don't know what it means.
Shorten Hills.
Yes, yeah. It was all one word. Short, E-N, and then hills. All one word. And I don't think I've heard many other famous people though. If we regard Hugh and me as famous.
And were there any teachers at the school you still remember or not? It's quite young.
The headmaster I remember, he was an artillery officer, so he was rather keen on mathematics, and there was well, I remember the teachers, almost all the teachers, I think. Monsieur Picard, who taught us French, and Major Lowndes, that's right. Oh, and there was one rather sort of grubby person who taught us French, also taught us French. Monsieur Picard taught us French mainly.
When you say grubby, are you using it in a moral sense or a physical sense? Or?
I would think both. But he was only there for one term.
But enough to have an unpleasant memory.
Yes. And then I went on from there to Winchester.
Yes.
Where, which was, I think, the connection. I do know that I was. My parents looked at all sorts of other schools as where I should go, and some of them quite advanced. I mean, I know that they were interested in not only in the ordinary public schools. One of my brothers went to Marlborough, and the other one went to Winchester.
You said you were good at maths. I mean, were you good at maths even at this age? In other words, at your preparatory school, or later, or both? Some mathematicians are.
Some mathematicians apparently early, including Peterson and Dart.
Yes, that's right. Were you?
I wasn't outstanding. I mean, I could do it, and the others couldn't. You know, in some cases, but.
When you went to Winchester, what was there you were beginning to specialise a bit in science by this sort of second, third year, was that?
Yes. And there were several teachers there that Eric James, Winchester has a house tutor who's somebody who goes around. Was attached. Each house had, I think, only one from the other staff who sort of went round and talked to us about the homework again. Eric James, who was later was the headmaster of Manchester Grammar School, and unlike almost everybody else at Winchester, was liberal, if not to say a little bit left. You know? I remember at the time of Munich, which was just at the end of the time, at the house I was in Winchester, there was only 3 people, 4, in the whole school. No, I can't say the whole school. In our house, and of about 40 pupils, and plus the house master and Eric James, who were least out about that Chamberlain was a hero, you know, and so on. Whereas my parents, for example, or my mother in particular, had connections with all sorts of people in Germany and already knew what was going on. But the others just didn't seem to be aware of it at all.
Do you remember it hanging over you like a cloud? I mean, my mother, who was born in 1922, I'm looking at her diaries, and she was in terror and fear as what was happening, and was so relieved when Chamberlain came back. Do you remember that?
Well, yes, I remember we had several German refugees or future refugees stayed with us in England. We had in the last summer holidays, I remember it, pre-war England, so to speak, we had 2 visitors from Germany. One was from I think he was the son of quite a prominent Nazi, and and another Jewish who was already foresaw what was happening, and and got out early, so to speak. And and had to be rather tactful about how they interacted with each other.
What else were you interested in apart from work at Winchester? I mean, some people were interested in drama, some in...
I was interested in photography, for example. And
in photography?
yes. And I think I was probably rather a boring schoolboy, come to think of it.
There was music?
Yes, some music. They're not. I wasn't good enough at it to be really interested, you know. And
You played an instrument?
Yeah, I played piano. I was taught piano to begin with, and I did it adequately. I remember I got my grade 1 or 2 or 3. I think it was 3 actually. I got up to on piano. But then I really didn't like it. I don't. Well, we had an aunt who was charming. Now later, I liked her very much. But that she always used to sing folk songs, and I couldn't stand that.
Did you? I mean, you stopped playing instruments and so on, but did music?
No, I went on actually. I took up flute and played in orchestras and things.
Did you?
For a long time, yes.
Do you still play?
Yes, I do actually. I try to rather.
And has music been important in your life?
Yes. I mean,
you go to operas, I gather.
Yes.
And do you? I mean, when you're relaxing or when you're in what parts of your life does music come in? Is it just a relaxation, or do you work to music or inspired by music?
No, I don't really like listening to music when I'm not listening to it, if you see what I mean. I don't like it terribly as background. But I do. There's a quartet club in Cambridge. It's a rather curious organisation, and I still go to that quite often. So, but I used to have my own quartet, so to speak.
Did you?
Well, it wasn't my own quartet, but we met more often in my house than anybody else's. But then the first and second violin got married, and then worse still, they had children, so that came to an end.
It became a whole orchestra.
No.
And you said folk music wasn't your delight at that time, but do you like other music? Presumably classical music is your real interest.
I'm afraid it's mainly classical, yes.
And which part of classical?
The earlier part.
The earlier part. Up to Beethoven? Or?
I go up to Brahms, and in fact, for that matter, some modern music I like. But I've never... It's never taken over my life in the way it does some mathematicians and other academics.
It doesn't. It hasn't inspired you.
It's been quite important, but not overwhelmingly important.
And you mentioned Eric James, but was there any other or any teacher who sometimes about that age, as a teacher who really focuses you in on what you're going to do later in your life and inspires you?
Well, amongst the hard sciences, so to speak, I suppose it was Lucas. Eric Lucas? I think so. Who?
What was his?
He was the biology teacher. But I didn't do any biology until. Because I thought I was going to come up here and do physics, do the ordinary tripos with physics and chemistry as my main subjects. But in fact, this was just the beginning of the war, and under strong pressure, perhaps not quite as strong, I didn't realise it was quite as strong then as I do now, if you see what I mean. My mother said that the obvious thing for me to do was medicine, because partly because very early in the war the government became aware of the fact that it was going to be short of doctors, and said exempted all medical students. So I took up. I had to. I joined the biology course right at the end, in fact, I didn't do much of it. I spent my first 2 terms here cramming organic chemistry and biology in order to get through the first MB.
Why did you come to Cambridge? I mean, you'd always lived or had friends and relatives around here, but...
Well, my father went to Oxford, so I could have gone there. I mean, it was a choice, so to speak, but not for classics. But I wasn't. I was rather reacted against classics, and so it was very definitely scientific, and for which Cambridge was reckoned to be better. I think that was probably why. And also, two of my brothers came to work at Trinity, and one of my uncles and my grandfather was an engineer who came to Trinity.
So you came to Trinity, did you?
And then, of course, in those days, it was just a question of picking up the telephone and ringing up somebody. It so happened that one of the tutors at Trinity had been at school with my father at Marlborough, so he picked up the phone, and that it was.
Times have
Seems
changed.
odd, doesn't it?
So tell me your impression. I mean, you knew Trinity, I suppose, anyway, through your father and through other people. So Cambridge wasn't much of a shock, really.
No.
It was a continuation of Winchester by other means.
No, it was. People who said that it was too large and so on and so forth, but I didn't mind it being large. I meant there was a bigger selection of people. And so that was really the first time that I got to know, got selectively friendly with particular people. At my preparatory school, I of course was friendly with Hugh. You might have met him. He was a general practitioner in Cambridge for a long time. But he was one of the most saintly people I know. And
did you know his father, or?
Well, only as an old gentleman in an armchair, And likewise his mother. Well, his mother was more obviously neurotic, I think. Well, I don't think Frances was neurotic, actually. But she was, and she had a breakdown, quite serious, at the time their eldest son John was.
Yes, he was killed, wasn't he? Which was the one who wrote Microcosmographica Academica?
Yes, that's Francis.
Francis, yes. Delightful book.
Yes.
And he fought, didn't Francis write in the Spanish Civil War?
Yes, John.
And John was killed there.
Yeah, he was killed there. But wasn't one of the Bruce Lockharts? Was another in the...
One was in the Secret Service. He was in Russia. That was earlier, but they were everywhere, so probably they were probably there too.
I have a vague recollection that he was another of the International Brigade.
Yes, quite probably. Yes. In Trinity at that time, you came up to read physics and chemistry. Was Dirac there then?
Yes, he was
still around.
Yeah, but I don't think anybody knew Dirac.
Didn't say much, did he?
No.
Who were the other?
He was in John's Dirac.
Was he?
Yeah. Oh. There was William Rushton. Was, I suppose, and Andrew Huxley and Alan Hodgkin. But they were contemporary. My brothers were older than me, and they'd both known Andrew and Alan Hodgkin. and who else? Amongst the physicists, I didn't have supervisions from any of them because I was then doing biological subjects.
Who were there any teachers, any lecturers or supervisors who you remember distinctly as influencing you a lot? Or
well, William Rushton. Was there any other? Were there any others? No, I don't. Not particularly. I don't think. I don't think the chemistry teachers I had were a particularly distinguished lot, actually. Whereas William Rushton he was from another school that had a large number of well-known people. Another one which I remember my parents considering sending me to, which is the one at Holt.
Oh yes, Gresham's.
Gresham School.
That's where Bruce Lockhart's uncle was a headmaster at Gresham.
Oh, was he? Yeah.
Logie, Bruce Lockhart.
Yeah.
That would have been afterwards, but
both Alan Hodgkin was there, and William Rushton, and also there's a lot of the poets. There's a whole string of well-known people in the arts world were there too, but also a number of scientists. Just trying to think who else amongst the people who... Adrian.
Lord Adrian.
Yeah, and his son Richard. Adrian was a friend of the Darwins in Cambridge, so my mother knew him very well, was a contemporary of his.
When you mentioned the arts world, at school you were, apart from photography, you were living a fairly quiet life. When you came to university, did you splash out into anything particular, or
not particular?
You were playing music.
Yes, I played some music. Yes,
but you worked hard and.
Yes, I was.
This is during the war.
Yes, so rather abnormal times.
How do you think the war most affected what you would have found at Cambridge as an undergraduate? I mean, a lot of people were away. It was subdued.
Yes, there was always plenty to do. I opted out of the Home Guard into, well, it was a division of the Home Guard, which used to occupy once Saturday or Sunday. I was a motorcycle dispatch rider, and that was great fun. We were supposed to get to know highways and byways of Norfolk, so you had to provide your own motorbike.
You had one, do you?
Well, I bought one quite soon, and went off trips into the countryside.
This was so that when the Germans infiltrated into East Anglia, you would be there on the spot.
That's right. The first people to be killed, probably. But I suppose there was a slightly... the course was compressed and people probably worked a bit harder. But I don't think it... and they kept most of it going, and the supervision system still kept going. Didn't make all that much difference.
You finished in 1944, 4?
Well, I had a very good year, actually. Well, two things happened. One was that I got there was the Rockefeller Foundation set up a series of scholarships, medical scholarships, using money which they couldn't. They used to have a very extensive system of postdoctoral exchanges, but they couldn't get people from Europe at that stage because they were all either enlisted or conscripted or became involved in operational research. So they spent the money on medical students instead, and I was lucky enough to get one of those. Supposed to go to medical school in America. Immediately I left here, but I'd got involved in a operational research group run by G.L. Brown on diving at Hampstead in London, and they wanted me to stay there, so I delayed going to the medical school for a year. That was a very good year, actually. It was my first experience of working in a research lab for any length of time, and it's also the first salary I earned.
Which year is this? 1940?
It must be 1943, I think. And I was there for for a full year, yes, working on problems of divers, physiology, in fact. Discovered, that was life for me, not the cotton industry or various other things I was offered.
So you spent a year there, but that's only taking you to 1944, and the war's still on. What did you do?
Well, then I went to America.
To America?
Yeah, for 2 years.
2 years. As a
medical student at Harvard Medical School.
And you were doing an MD or a MA?
Sorry?
You were doing an MA or a...
No, MD.
MD, yes. I wondered how you got a MD from Harvard. That's how it was.
Yes. Yes, that was the British government. Told Harvard Medical School it must on no account qualify me to be a doctor, because then, of course, I might have become a doctor there. But Harvard Medical School said, we're not going to have the British government dictating to us who we give our degrees to. So they went out of their way to give me one.
Can you remember your feelings on going to America? That must have been a bit of a shock during the war.
Well, I was sort of independent I was not independent, but semi-independent and thinking and capable of acting independently. By the time I went off there. And it was supposed to be, in fact, it was might have been thought to be a safer place than America might have been thought safer. But actually, if you look up the accident records, actually, of the group of 20 of us who went over there, I think 2 were torpedoed. Another 2 got tuberculosis, that's right, and something like another 2 stayed there anyway. So it wasn't very safe option, really.
Did you like America? Did you think you might stay there?
Well, yes, I would have. It's a very it seems to be evolved to suit foreigners, America, and both. So they always seem to be welcome, and I had a very good time there. But they worked very hard. I was quite shocked when I came back at the end of 2 years as a medical student, and finished off with a year at University College, to find how little work the English medical students gave, and also that in many respects the training was better than the American one in many ways, because one had much more responsibility as a student, and much more experience of actual clinical work than when in America it was then, much more like it is now here, that you have, when you finished at ordinary medical school, you've still got lots of hospital appointments to be filled before you can be qualified and so on. So the medical training, I reckon that my contemporaries who stayed behind got at least as good an education as we did, the few of us who went there.
So you came back just probably a year after the end of the war.
Yes, just at the end of the war, yes.
And did another year. Yeah. And then what did you do?
Well, then you could get qualified without doing any resident work in a hospital. So I did that. I got medically qualified, and then I had to decide whether to enter the rat race and do the necessary number of residencies and house jobs and so on. And I thought that if I was going to do research, which is what I thought I wanted to do, I better have a go straight away. So I enrolled as a PhD student with Adrian.
Adrian.
Again, that was amazingly simple. Once one found how to get hold of Adrian, he was notorious for being very difficult to get hold of, and I hunted him down in the physiology lab many times. But he had a way of going down the stairs 2 steps at a time, with very close to the wall, so you couldn't get in his way. He escaped me once or twice like that, but then
he was at Trinity.
He was at Trinity, yes, but you didn't see him there. He was in the Master's Lodge.
Because he was Master there.
Yes.
Tell me what he was like. I mean, he was your supervisor, was he?
No, he wasn't. No, he was. William Rushton was my supervisor, except that he wasn't, because he was my director of studies. But he talked to people anyway, and I knew quite a lot because of in the practical classes, and the demonstrators, you get to know them like that. And he was quite. Unlike many supervisors, he'd actually come around and talk to people, see what they understood. And I really understood pretty well what he was like, and it seemed to me that it would be sensible to have supervision in subjects I wasn't so good at.
But who was your PhD supervisor?
That was Adrian, but again, it's not like a modern PhD supervisor sees a lot of their students. Some would say the students do all their work for them in there. But he wasn't like that either. He'd come round sort of once a month or something like that and just see how things were going on. Always had interesting things, referencing, have you read this, and interesting conversation. I wouldn't say much encouragement. And as soon as I started wanting to do anything different from what he'd suggested, I don't think I ever got anything except negative advice. I shouldn't do that. I remember I decided that what I wanted to do was to do lecture physiology on vision, and I had a contemporary who was also doing that. And it was in a time when you couldn't get money for grants very easily, but there was an enormous amount of surplus war equipment for making neurophysiological apparatus. And he was in London. I found out that you could get all the bits of amplifiers and so on and so forth in these government surplus stores for ridiculous prices. They sold the stuff by the pound weight. So you got a piece of equipment that would have cost hundreds of pounds, and it would weigh 10 pounds, and it got 6 pence a pound.
Well, a lot of scientists in that period, people like Anthony Hewish and so on, talk about getting ex-army surplus Air Force. It had a bigger effect on Cambridge science, all these bits and pieces from the war.
Yes. Well, in those days anyway, much more sound equipment was homemade. There were very good workshops and so on. So you could get things, even if you couldn't buy them for sixpence a pound, you could get them made.
So you finished your PhD and then became a research fellow, or?
Yes. Well, I got that was the end of my time as a PhD. I did eventually. I tried to get. I told Adrian that I wanted to do this, and his advice about that was I wanted to do. Keffer Hartline was a person who'd first recorded from frog's retina, and I said I thought there was more to be found out there. But Adrian's advice was not to do that because I remember him saying, Keffer's a very clever chap, you know.
Who is?
Keffer Hartline, that was.
Yeah.
Is a very clever chap, you know, and that was his warning that I shouldn't go into that field. But I did, all the same.
What, I mean, very briefly, what was your PhD on?
Well, I worked first on eye movements, and that was a matter of trying to find a good way of recording eye movements and see if, at those times there was a theory around that eye movements were actually, it's not fair to say more important, but were more, on a short scale, were more important. People talked about scanning the image as if, I mean, it was a day when people were beginning to be aware of how television worked, with scanning beam and so on. It suggested that something like that went on in the eye. And so that if that had been the case, there was a lot more to be found out just by following eye movements. But in fact, eye movements didn't, the pattern of eye movements was known since the early 1900s to be in terms of jerky movements from one fixation point to another. A fixational pause and another fixational pause, and moving around like that. And didn't encourage that theory at all. And I was able to show that when a person was actually resolving something, the eye was often moving very little. And also you can do experiments showing that when the eye has only a very short period of time to see something, it sees very nearly as much as it can when it can move, except of course it can't see movement because you only see it at one moment in time. But if you take away the actual perception of movement, the other aspects of vision, it can perform just as well as it can
with a longer period.
When you try and stop the eye movements by very short exposure.
Yes, let's go on. We'll come back to some of your research in a minute. So we're through to about 1949 or something like that, the end of your PhD. Was that when you came to King's, or? No,
that was when I went. That's when I was. I failed to get a research studentship first time I applied, and the second time I did.
This was at Trinity.
Yes, at that I think it was 1950. I was there for the next 3 or 4 years. Except I included in that a year's visit to Steve Kuffler's lab in Baltimore just before we moved up to Harvard. So already by the time I went to Berkeley, I'd already spent a year in America actually. Well, no, 3 years altogether. It's quite a long time.
So you went from Trinity to Berkeley?
Yes.
In what year was that?
No, I went from Trinity to King's.
Oh, right.
And then from King's to Berkeley.
Okay. But you were in King's for how long?
For I think it was 8 or 9 years. Until in fact the assassination of Kennedy. I was at Feast at King's. No, I'm getting things confused.
Because everyone remembers the moment they heard the news.
Yes.
You think you were at a feast at King's?
No, I wasn't. That was when I heard. I then got. I was here for I think almost 10 years, and then I got an offer of a job at Berkeley, which sounded quite fun. So I accepted that. But there was a long delay before I got my visa, and it was. I heard I'd got my visa the day that Kennedy was assassinated.
Right. Tell me about kings between roughly 1950 and 1960. Were there any? Did you have any particular friends or memories of that time?
Well, first impression is how different from Trinity it was. I think probably the differences between colleges have got less rather than more. But
what were the differences?
Well, it was Danger Islands, and there was always a lively conversation going on somewhere at King's High Table, and but not at Trinity. Trinity was very
staid.
Yes, and
so Dady, you knew Dady.
Yes, I wasn't one of his boys. If you see what I mean.
Peter Avery, you knew?
Who?
Peter Avery.
No, I didn't know him actually.
He probably maybe just a bit towards the end of your time, but and you knew Noel Allen.
I knew Noel a bit. Yes.
Was he provost at that time?
Yes, well, he was elected during that time. Shepherd was.
Shepherd was provost.
Yes.
What was Shepherd like? There are many stories of Shepherd.
Well,
they're all true.
I think he's a disappointment. I mean, he was a character.
Yes.
But
not intellectually very exciting.
No.
Who were the exciting people at that time?
Well, Noel was lively, and the biochemist, no, the pathologist who ran
Dixon?
White.
No,
Dixon, yes, and
Kendall Dixon.
Kendall Dixon, yes.
Yes.
But did you know A.V. Hill?
Yes. He was a Nobel Prize winner, wasn't he? A physicist.
No, that's his father.
Oh, that was his father.
Yes, that was a contemporary of Adrian's. A.V. Hill was the son of his Maurice Hill.
Yes.
Was the son of A.V. Hill. A.V. Hill was a Nobel Prize winner.
Maurice Hill.
Yes.
What about?
He was a geologist.
What about Donald Parry? Did you know?
Yes.
Because he was a zoologist.
He was amiable and also a neurophysiologist like me.
A nice man.
Yes, he was. Again, I don't think the intellectual standard was any higher in King's, but they were a less gloomy lot and more apt to talk to each other. So
you then went off to America.
Yeah.
How long did you stay there?
Almost 10 years. And that was I enjoyed that. I was teaching. It was quite easy teaching because I was teaching in the optometry school, and to fit a pair of glasses you don't need an awful lot of optics, or for that matter an awful lot of physiology. So it was quite easy teaching, and there was interesting research going on, and I was able to do what I wanted. So it was, and Berkeley was a very nice place. Do you know Berkeley?
Yes, I've been to Berkeley. I liked it.
Yes.
Nicest of the universities I've been to in the States. Both in location and spirit.
Is that so?
Both in location and its ethic. It seems
yes, quite
liberal.
So I enjoyed that.